I want to introduce Denise Hibay from the New York Public Library, who you heard speak yesterday, and who will be chairing this panel. And this panel is about the prospects for gaining better benefits from, better exploiting the shared infrastructure that's been created already for preservation of print serials.
Okay, first sound check. Everyone can hear me. You can hear me? Great. So I wanted to introduce our two panelists very briefly. Mark Jacobs, the Executive Director of Washington Research Libraries Consortium, WRLC, a consortium founded in 1987. And also here to my left is Jake Nadal, who is the Executive Director of RECAP, the offsite. I won't get into what the acronym stands for because I can't remember, but it's my own institutions too. But RECAP is the offsite storage facility for Columbia University, New York Public Library, and Princeton University. So I think we heard a lot yesterday about offsite storage facilities, and I kind of just want to throw out this general question to both of Mark and Jake about how we can better leverage the investment that we've made in these shared print repositories. It feels to me that we're kind of on the cusp of a new moment here for shared print repositories. In a sense, they were there as kind of overflow for our robust collection building, and now we realize they could perhaps help us go forward in a completely transformative way. So, having said that, I would like to throw it out to both of you for your comments and thoughts. Mark.
Your characterization of it as overflow, I think, is very apt. I think in the context of the WRLC, it was very much okay, we no longer want this stuff on campus, so fortunately, we have the safety valve. We can get it off campus and we can repurpose space, or we can bring new materials in. And in a place like Washington, D.C. or New York City, real estate is very expensive. And so having that safety valve has been really important. But what I've seen over the last few years is people being more intentional about what gets there and what you do with it, the commitments that we make to each other on those materials. So for journals, the WRLC has three modules for what we call our shared collections facility, because it really is part of our shared, it is a key element in a shared collection. It's not a off-site storage facility, which suggests that these things are not terribly important, and it's kind of like the attic. But so in 2008, we needed more space, and our board of directors is actually made up of the 9 provosts and chief financial officers of our universities, and they said that they didn't really want to give us more money to build more space if we were just going to be storing 7 copies of a particular journal. And so it's really from the board level to take the fullest advantage of the money that they were willing to commit to this, that they said you can only have 1 copy of any journal. Well, that meant we had to start sharing those things. And so our collection has been built, our shared collection has really been built by people moving journals to the WRLC shared collections facility, and then somebody trying to send the next copy. Well, the next copy can't come in, and so those get recycled. So we now have a total of something like 9,900 shared titles, about 436,000 volumes. But we've also been able to recycle nearly 200,000 volumes as a result of the shared copy. And we've started doing something similar in monographs also. Monographs had always been covered by the policy, but we had no way to implement it because the data was so much less useful in order to say this particular instance of a book is identical to this instance, and so we know there are duplicates, and what are we going to do with those things? But we used Sustainable Collection Services in 2013 to help us give ourselves a much better picture of what kind of collection we had. And so we've now committed to 5.5 million circulating monographs, we've now committed that we're going to keep all single copies and any second copies of every edition, so that the consortium as a whole never loses access to any of the materials that they've ever had in the past. But they also have the opportunity for all those 3rd through 9th copies of deciding what they want to do with those. And so I think you're right. It's gone from being an attic to being a central part of the shared collection, and being able to manage those collections in a much more collaborative and effective way.
Yeah, I would second and affirm all of that. I guess the direction I would take this in is to commend you on your use of the word leverage, because I think that's what we're seeing at Recap is that this is a really important part of the strategy, is that Recap essentially extends all of the value of investment libraries are required to make it in core infrastructure, and gets them the maximum, the partners the maximum value out of that. There's a great essay, John Hagel, Unbundling the Corporation, was one of these Harvard Business Review's 10 best of their publication history pieces. And a lot of his discussion is about that organizations are either relationship focused, innovation focused, or infrastructure focused. And a lot of what we've been talking about in the shared collections world is what is the infrastructure we need, and places like WRLC and Recap excel at that. If any of you have fewer than 28 employees in your library and more than 10 million items that they manage, I'd like to talk to you, right? Because you're doing something better than I am. But our kind of net cost per volume for lifetime preservation is now beating Paul Courant's number handily by a factor of 2 or 3. And so we've been able to kind of leverage our scale to give our partners a kind of massive kind of disencumbering, so that they can worry about things that I can't, right? David and Denise have relationships with their scholars that I will never have, partly because I just don't even speak the right language, right? We can work with innovative groups, right? So we're able to work with a software company to build middleware that's going to just eradicate many of the barriers to sharing collections that 2 years ago were insurmountable. We've talked to logistics companies, Iron Mountain, UPS, that are just obviating transit problems, right? The question of can we get this from here to there by then is on its way to being just a non-issue. And that's just because we've decided we're an infrastructure business, and we've taken that investment that the partners have made in building a big infrastructure business, and we're now starting to leverage that with all of the other services that are available. And I think that means that for shared collections, as Mark has said, if you put something in WRLC or Recap, it's sort of the equivalent of putting your money in the bank. It's just way better there than in the mattress of the on-campus stacks.
And I know from my perspective at my institution, the benefit of this new work is reducing that friction in logistics between servicing those items. We don't have real-time status in terms of requests from offsite. That I believe there's a weariness on the part of our patrons with some things that's offsite. They don't think how I think, oh, it's wonderful, we have that unique copy. It's that, oh, it takes me a day to get it. And so related to that is this kind of getting the infrastructure to its optimal kind of working possibility, and then going beyond that to this, again, why we're here is the national conversation, the national concern about connecting these collections. And I know I mentioned, perhaps prematurely, client services of our consortium, because let's face it, these facilities are serving your 12 or 10 institutions, and currently it's serving our 3 institutions. How do we look beyond that to connecting these and again, leveraging them for the benefit of everyone? And let's take some questions from the audience.
I thought his statement was it David from Duke?
Kevin,
Kevin,
Jeff, I'm sorry.
What's your name? The guy from Duke said it all. Somehow or other, we have got, so you're right, we use the integrated library system to manage all of that. So we manage the shared collections facility using that, but it's also the discovery tool for all the users within the LC. So within our world, it's all there in one place. We do have real-time availability because it's all in the catalog. And one of the things that we often talk about is that it would be unfortunate if we have to recreate a database of all those things. So, and you had to do that.
Yeah.
We don't have to do that. We use the ILS as our management tool for the shared collection facility, but also the collections on the libraries. And so it's all there in one place, and we're already using the data that has already been created. And it seems to us that ideally, somehow or other, we would have a national or international database with bibliographic records in it that we could all have that information in, so we would all be able to see it. And of course, we do have that database. The question is, how do we leverage that to really solve this problem? And I agree completely with you that we don't want to do it by having to do more data entry. It's got to be something that is somehow done one time and solves all the need.
Kind of like a real-time OCL state WorldCat.
But I think this is Amy Wood from Center for Research Libraries. I think the one thing, I always think of data and the systems that we use as our communication, as that is, we now have another angle to our relationship. And the data isn't dead. I mean, the volumes are live, they're used by people, it is stored in case of use, and therefore the data isn't dead. And just because you've deposited that data in one place, if someone else accesses that data will change. And if you then have the same data in your local system, you have to keep it in sync. And to speak to Jeff's point, we, at least with paper, we've tried very hard to make this a back and forth communication with the data, so that the data at Duke is in sync with journal, and journals in sync with paper, and papers in sync with OCLC. And this is huge, but it's not a one-time deposit it, clean it up. It's watching. Data changed again. Now I need to tell everyone because they're my partners. So it's very ongoing.
I think a lot of this becomes a question of where the canonical data sits.
Yeah.
Knowing what your canonical data is, and I might do it differently than Recap's going to do it, but I don't have. Maybe I make a choice for retention. I'm going to do it in journal. I only ever want to do it in journal because everything communicates. It won't matter, and I don't want to have to know to remember. It's like people who ask you, why isn't the D space? Why isn't my stuff that's in my D space in my catalog? And the question isn't in the catalog. The question is, isn't in the discovery layer? And you don't want to replicate canonical data. You never want to do that. You only want to communicate it and have it change everywhere, right?
Right. No, I definitely agree with that. But then there are also the systems used for different purposes. So even in WorldCat, our old vision of if you want to let your patrons know that you have access to this thing, you put your holding from it. That becomes misleading if there's really only one holding, but the 10 institutions have attached their holding, because that's the way that system works. So you do have, there are a lot of things in play, and we're in the middle of all this. I mean, we are changing our old ideas and we have to create the infrastructure that we're doing.
Yeah, I'm going to chime in to say, so having just completed a grueling 3 months of business requirements formation around this question, we came to a similar conclusion, but I think in our developing our shared collection also got some real clarity around some of these questions about canonical data, right? So we had 3 institutions renowned for their cooperativeness and magnanimity towards one another, and willingness to change their ways of doing business. And we decided we needed every institution to have its own source of canonical data, right? New York Public Library needs to catalog things the right way for New York Public Library to catalog them, as does Princeton, as does Columbia, and each of them has good reasons to make the decisions they're going to make. we needed to aggregate all that data, and we needed to make it to inventory management decisions we were making at Recap that we made for very good reasons, based on size, weight, and other criteria. And so when we talked about the system that runs between that, we started to really enforce a rule that it should never know anything, right? Like it should not care, right? It should take the data it's given from a trusted source and only one trusted source, and reflect that back out to others and be transparent about what it was saying and why, so that they in turn could make decisions. So the team at Columbia and Princeton New York Public Library, each of them wanted all of that data, and they wanted to manage their customer relationship, right? They didn't want Princeton's decisions to have to take into account Columbia users or Columbia needs. And in segregating those and kind of building those walls between canonical data, we actually got, I think, a much more flexible, powerful system. And so to the kind of keystrokes question, there are a lot of discussions that we've had, and our answer has been, we will do nothing until October when we build the database, right? Because right now, it would be entering a 583 field in 4 or 5 different sources. 6 months from now, it's enter a 583 field in your ILS and tell the various systems offices where that data lies and what they can do with it. And so that one set of keystrokes can now become 5, 10, or 100. And so I think this principle of respecting local relationships and local canonical data, and then having interpretive rules, APIs around them, has really helped us scale up our shared collections project.
So Denise's, is this on? Yeah. Denise's question I thought was really good about, how can we go beyond what we need to do in the initial, service. Sorry, how can we go beyond what we need to do in the initial service to our members in these consortia and leverage the value of that for others? And that reflected, in my mind, back to a discussion that the Council of Voting Members had yesterday with Bernie around the whole issue of, electronic delivery when you request a reel of microfilm from CRL. If it happens, they will scan and deliver that. And the question was, should we, for the things that are out of copyright, should we make them open access available instead of only to CRL members? It's the same kind of question we're asking here about these repositories. In doing what you have to do with your members, what is there that could be leveraged for a broader constituency? And obviously, electronic document delivery is one area that should be explored in the process of getting it cheaper, faster, and easier to deliver to your partners. If digital is one of the ways you're going to go, maybe where possible, where legal, archiving and opening access to those digitized materials might be something to think about.
Yeah, and with all respect to the New Jersey Attorney General, who I didn't expect to be invoked earlier this morning, those are the sorts of things I think we would think about. Right? And again, because each partner has told us what they have and what they're willing to do with it, the conditions of sharing that they're willing to allow, means we're in a really good conversation if I want to have a talk to WRLC and say, gee, Recap has these kind of resources with these kind of permissions. Does your membership have a set of values that can connect? Much easier for us to have a conversation than for 15 libraries to try to synchronize all of their MARC records. And
I would just add there, as I'm representing the New York Public Library, I think of all the partners, we have the broadest possible access, mission and approach. So I think that really positions us in a really good place to be serving the broadest possible constituency. Tom, you had a comment.
So, first, I think the New Jersey Attorney General, as long as Christie's in office, has to be as to this single source for collecting data. I was reminded of the conversation yesterday at the members' meeting about membership going forward. And I was also reminded about some of the discussions the Hottie Trust Print archiving group had about trying to think about services that might be, it might encourage people to join the organization going forward. And in some respects, this single point of retention commitment, or the ability to develop analytical services that would be useful to members, might be something to think about going forward for both these organizations. And maybe it's something that doesn't need to be replicated.
Denise is just reminding me that, we have a growing phase 2 of this project where we've been asking the same questions internally, right? There's a set of big decisions we can make pretty soon, but at a certain point we need analytic tools to help make the kind of really refined decisions about what to collect, what to buy, how to share.
This is Ivy from the Ivy Anderson from the California Digital Library. I've always thought that one of the geniuses of the UC repository system was the persistence policy that my UC colleagues developed, which in one fell swoop said everything in these repositories is persistent. So no metadata management required. If it's in one of those facilities, you know that it has a retention commitment, that has a long-term life to it. And it seems to me that one might be able to leverage that kind of information rather than having to manage metadata at the individual level. If you know that institution X has a certain policy, it's sort of like the shared print policy management that you do in papers, Bernie, right? If you know that that program has a certain set of policies, you can then relate those two pieces of information without actually having to manage the individual metadata. And I thought that last copy kinds of agreements or relationships could work the same way, that one could have a fairly lightweight national system that says we are an institution that signs up to a certain protocol about what we will do if we own the last copy of something, that we will consult national registries, that we will determine if something is the last copy before we withdraw it, and then we will commit to retain it in some way. And that would be a way to manage that. If you knew that when you checked for copies of a particular item, that institution X holds it, and they have agreed to be a last copy repository, then again, you don't need that information at the individual level. So this is something to think about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The profiles that we started developing, that we just started connecting to the paper registry, are designed to provide information about the commitment, the level of commitment. And what was particularly useful, one profile we did was at the University of California JSTOR archive. And what was particularly useful in that was the information we were able to find that the University of California disclosed about the auditing of that archive, which is the highest level of auditing of any print archive anywhere, as far as I can tell. It's basically, I think it's like page level validation of the archive, and that's actually audited independently by JSTOR on a regular basis. So knowing that, it seems to me that's the kind of information you could tell somebody in New Jersey for whether the thing that they've just come to their attention from their stacks as being waterlogged or termite ridden or that kind of thing. If it's held in this other regional library facility or if it's held in the JSTOR archive, that gives you actual information to make a decision about this soaking wet thing in your hand.
I would jump in and say, actually, that's another important shading of the question about leverage right now, is that if I were to counsel a library about the smart move to make in the next couple of years, it's retain as much as you possibly can, right? Because every item you retain is one that when RECAP says, gee, our copy is not in good condition, we may really want that, right? And any region that's going to talk to another region about establishing a shared print network, it's much more exciting to talk to a region that has really rich holdings and perhaps fills gaps in the access you can provide to your users or helps you amend condition problems in your repository. So now is actually a pretty good time to retain collections so that when we have the national conversation, you come to the table with a significant amount of leverage.
And I would just add, from a collection management point of view, I think as the partners came together, our combined collections are so enormous and so complicated, the validation process, that I think we quickly understood, let's not go there. Let's kind of, we're starting here and we're going forward. So that comes back to the greatest hope for, extending the life of the facility, which is also kind of one of our goals related to this project, is to do prospective collecting. And just to kind of slightly go off topic here, I wanted to point out the idea of these MOUs and these collection agreements, which, and to kind of avoid that record business, or that detailed work is, starting way upstream at the collection development policy, and what implications does it have for our 21st century policies. I know some institutions have really made some revisions and made great efforts in tying their policy to internal, intra-institutional collaboration and also external partners. So I just wanted to throw that out there for my collection management and development folks.
Can I ask a question? So, thank you. So as these retention policies become more public, and the idea that there's something in the repository, or maybe it's there for life. So what is altruism plan to this? And as Susan Gibbons mentioned yesterday, how do we start to recover the costs for you guys, the big institutions, for maintaining this collection that I might decide against or because of your holding commitments? And when does recap become business and start charging fees? And I mean, is this really about altruism and preserving the cultural heritage of our life, our country, or is it about being able to help you guys sustain the business? You guys have to keep in business. You talked about the electric bill.
Right. Before we jump on to recap, I want to make sure we're watching and calling. Since they've been in the business a little longer than recap, whether that has been something that's come up in your discussions and deliberations of, extending beyond the New York, DC metro area.
Regularly, we don't have any answer. I'm not sure what kind of a model would make sense, and would anybody really pay for it? We've talked about, there's quite a few smaller colleges in the region that we are in. Could you ever set up a system whereby they would, I'm completely making up the numbers, they would pay you $1,000 a year for the right to have the access to our collection so that they could do on their campuses whatever they wanted to do. But I don't have it's a very good question, and how long are our provosts really going to be willing to keep paying for expanded space and the services? And we just built a third module, and we've gotten our first year of utility bills, and they're 50% higher than we expected. So we've got to do something to try to bring those down, but the money has to come from something. So it's a very interesting question.
Mark and I were talking last night about the impact and the dynamic that's added to both of our boards because we have provosts sitting on it. And I thought you mentioned it now, and I thought it would be good to surface that. Because I think that's part of the answer to your question is if those potential, I don't know what class of member or customer or associate they are, if their institution sees some viability to that, and our board sees that it lifts some of the weight, then there could be a path forward.
This reminds me of Matthew's question reminds me about altruism versus local interest or self-interest. The conversation we've had about open access in the organizations like CRL that are membership supported always have to figure out the balance between what we do that's pro bono for everybody and what we do that's just only exclusively serves our member community. And that's a conversation I think or an argument that's been going on for about 50 years in the library world. And I don't think there's anybody found the right line that were the perfect balance of that. I think one of the things that Hockey Trust did was I think probably might be confirmed this, but that really strengthened their identity was the fight against the Authors Guild suit, or the fight against or the fight for opening up content, non-public domain content. Not so much the Authors Trust suit itself, but the fact that Hockey Trust took a position that has been maintained by the library that if it's public domain content, it should be open access. If it's we could put as much other content be open access as well. And I think that, that taking a kind of a pro bono stand can sometimes be an important draw for support, whether it's from more libraries to participate or whether it's from the larger university administration. I don't know, big good question.
While we're getting a microphone up to Ivy, I want to just put a footnote on the kind of altruism question. That I think the recap hasn't had a fulsome discussion of this. We've started to have a principle emerge that if it costs us nothing to do something good for the community, we ought to do it, right? So all of our software development is coming out under an Apache 2.0 license. We have to support and maintain that software anyway, so we're telling the community we will continue to support and maintain this software so that for them, at least, they're getting trustworthy, well-written, well-maintained code, and they know that, well, as long as Recap is using this thing, we know that they're going to maintain a vendor to support and an updated patch of that software. So, likewise, I think if we start to try to divide the question of keeping collections into services and infrastructural costs, there are some things the Recap partners have to spend just for Recap to operate. But if we start adding associates and adding, there's a net cost to that. And I think it's a good time for especially institutions who see themselves as sort of net consumers or net partners rather than infrastructure providers, to start thinking about what costs you are going to avoid by joining those things, right? And start thinking about what your willingness to pay is and what a good deal sounds like to you. So I think we're a long way from knowing, or even, we have plenty to do ourselves. We don't need to make a marketing proposal to my agenda for the year. And as Tom said, the New Jersey AG is busy. I don't want to put anything on their plate. But 5 or 6 years from now, right, it might be time to have some really sophisticated conversations about that. And I think that's a healthier conversation when both parties come to the table knowing what costs they're defraying and what costs they're absorbing in one of those relationships.
Just going to make 2 comments with a couple of my colleagues in this room would probably better be positioned to answer. But from the Hibay Trust perspective, in the very early formulation of how the shared print monographs project might work, there was the notion that all of the retaining institutions would be financially supported somehow. And I think the group that looked at that closely, and Tom can speak to this, moved away from that and said this is more overhead than it's worth, and it's not something that's really going to benefit us, and institutions are going to retain material anyway. In the West project, and Emily can speak to this a little bit better, one of the things we found that was where we have some partners who are quite small institutions who are not actively participating that much in the initiative in terms of contributing volumes or archiving volumes, but they found that the ability to have the narrative with their administrations, that they are part of a larger partnership which is sustaining the record, and they have access to collections because they are part of a larger system of stewardship, had major value to them internally in terms of the narrative, both with their faculties and with their administrations, and that joining the membership and supporting it financially had some value just for that purpose. There's probably a limit to how much you can pay if you're not really benefiting from it. But for collections that circulate at the level of 1 or 2%, it's hard to make the case that there are major services that are being provided for access to those collections because they're not drawn on that frequently. But that ability to participate in that narrative and say that you're part of the national system does have some important, I think, narrative value.
It does, but I think it's easy to overestimate the power of it. I speak from the experience of CRL, where that narrative is the narrative of CRL, and you still struggle with some institutions still struggle to grasp that or to even make the point for administration.
Okay, Carla Street, OSU. Kind of reinforcing all this, I think, this is reminding me that, last week I was sitting across the table from an R&D person from Elsevier and trying to talk to them about their unrealistic expectations about value propositions and how much money can be extracted from the system. And while I don't think we want to frame this as some moral high ground kind of issue, I think we don't want to get too schizophrenic either in our imaginings about the great value that's being created here for other parts of our community that could be leveraged. Because I think there's some danger actually here about, and I think the Hadi monograph conversation kind of surfaces when we looked at the numbers that had been in that original proposal, that there seemed to be an assumption that there was several $1 million worth of value for the smaller institutions in our community, and we're kind of like, they've got millions of dollars that we could somehow extract collectively with this just one little, really from their perspective, I think, project to secure print archiving. And so while I think this is a healthy question, a healthy conversation, and in some ways this may be a healthy group to have it in because we have a wide range of institutions in the room, I just don't want us to start thinking like an Elsevier that there's tremendous value here that we could extract from the smaller and less resourced parts of our community. We're a very active member in Ohio Link, and I go to those meetings when we're trying to find the money to pay for the big commercial products that are the latest and greatest scholarship that teaching and learning is built on day to day. And I think about, how much more could we extract from those partner relationships for legacy content? And I'm like, we better be careful here in our planning.
Well, on that note of realism, I think we'll close this session. Thanks to our panelists, which was terrific.